On the 21st of November 1983, 15-year-old schoolgirl Linda Mann had taken a shortcut on her way home from babysitting in Narborough, Leicestershire. She'd been babysitting for quite some time, but instead of taking her normal route home, she went down a footpath known locally as the Black Pad. Unfortunately for Linda, this would prove deadly, and the next morning she was found raped and lying dead on the floor after she'd been strangled to death. Of course, this was back in '83, so using forensic science techniques available at the time, the police would go on to link a semen sample taken from her body to a person with type A blood and an enzyme profile that matched only 10% of males. But with no other leads or evidence to go off, the case remained cold for the next few years that followed. Fast forwarding to 1985 though, and Alec Jeffreys, a genetics researcher at the University of Leicester, was about to change the world forever with his new discovery, and he would help beat the cold case of Linda Mann. You see, his new discovery was none other than, you guessed it, creating a DNA profile. He had made the discovery by accident during a failed experiment to study the way in which inherited illnesses pass through families. He had extracted DNA from cells and attached it to photographic film, which was then left in a photographic developing tank. Once extracted, the film showed a sequence of bars. Alex soon realised that every individual whose cells had been used in the experiment could be identified very specifically, and the techniques could be used to determine kinship. So in other words, what he would do is use DNA extraction techniques to obtain DNA profiles from old stains. But as this technology was starting to solidify, the British government would approach Alec because they were seeking his assistance with immigration cases, and at this point in time it wasn't anything to do with criminal investigations. But as all this was happening, Linda's killer was about to strike once again. At around 4:30 p.m. on the 31st of July 1986, 15-year-old schoolgirl Dawn Ashworth set off from a friend's house in Narborough, Leicestershire, and began to walk home. Dawn lived in nearby Enderby, a short distance away, and decided to take a shortcut down a footpath known locally as £10 Lane. As you can see here, £10 Lane joins up with the Black Pad on the same route. Dawn's parents expected her to return home around 9:30 p.m, but she'd never make it there. Why? Well, because just like Linda, she was found dead in a wooded area near the footpath after being savagely raped and strangled to death. Once again, using the technology that was available to them, police recovered semen samples which revealed that the person who had committed the crime had that same rare blood type as the person who had raped and killed Linda. Detectives linked the two incidents as one because they happened so close together, and of course, once again, that rare blood type. 17-year-old local boy Richard Buckland had become an initial suspect, and he had learning difficulties, but he knew Dawn. He had knowledge of some details of the crime that had not been made public, and under questioning he would repeatedly admit to the crime, but later would withdraw the admission. He refused to confess to Linda's murder, but the police thought he was lying, so 10 days later on August the 10th, 1986, Richard would go on to be charged with Dawn and Linda's murders. Up until this point, DNA profiling hadn't been used in a criminal investigation, but after Richard's first court appearance, Alec would receive an unexpected phone call from the police asking him whether his new discovery could prove that Richard had in fact killed the two schoolgirls. He would go on to carry out tests and immediately could see that the girls had been raped by the same man, but that man wasn't Richard. The police were astonished and were initially reluctant to believe what they were hearing, but after Alec repeated his tests multiple times, it showed that they were reliable. After now being back at square one with no suspect, quick thinking from police would make them test the entire neighbourhood out, and an operation was set up to gather the DNA of every man in the area who was born between 1953 through to 1970. A letter would go on to be sent out to everyone who fit the profile, and 2 test centres were set up at a local school and a council office, and these tests would take place in the morning and evening 3 days a week. It was a voluntary scheme. Some declined, saying they didn't like needles or saying they didn't like police officers, but most of them soon changed their minds down to public pressure. After 8 months, 5,500 men had given blood samples and only one had refused, but there was still no match with the semen samples, so police began to expand the hunt. Among those who were recorded as having given a sample was Colin Pitchfork, a 27-year-old baker and father of 2 young children. You see, 3 years earlier he'd been questioned about his movements on the evening that Linda had been murdered. He had said, quite correctly, that he'd been looking after his young son. But at some point in August of 1987, more than a year after the killing of Dawn, one of Colin's workmates, a man only known as Kelly, was having a pint with a few friends in a pub in Leicester. The conversation turned to Colin for whatever reason, and Kelly confessed that he had impersonated him in order to take the blood tests on his behalf. Kelly would go on to explain that Colin had asked for this favour because he had already taken the test for a friend who had been convicted for indecent exposure when he was younger. Colin had doctored his passport, inserting Kelly's photograph, and then drove him to the test centre at the school, waiting outside while the blood sample was taken. Around 6 weeks after that conversation in the pub, one of the people who was there had relayed this to a local policeman. Kelly was promptly arrested, and by the end of the day, Colin was in custody. After reading him his rights, a detective would go on to ask Colin, "Why Dawn Ashworth?" To which it was noted that he shrugged and replied, "Opportunity, she was there, and I was there." When he was questioned by police, he would give a detailed confession to both murders and 2 other sexual assaults. Believe it or not, when he had raped and killed Linda Mann, his car had been parked nearby, and his baby son had been asleep in the back of it. He would also go on to admit to exposing himself to more than 1,000 women, a compulsion that began in his early teens but would later progress to sexual assault and, of course, strangling his victims. A short while later, he would go on to be charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of rape, 2 counts of indecent assault, and 1 count of conspiring to pervert the course of justice. Of course, this had came down to that confession that he made, and DNA evidence confirmed that he was the double killer. He would go on to plead guilty to all of these charges and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years, and the judge was reported as saying, quote, "From the point of view of the safety of the public, I doubt if he ever should be released." However, in 2009, that 30-year term was reduced on an appeal to 28 years. Now, over the past 5 years, since 2016, Colin Pitchfork has served that 28-year sentence and has been attempting to get out of jail. On the 22nd of April 2016, the parole board heard his case for an early release on parole. His advocates presented evidence of his improved character, noting that he had furthered his education to a degree level and had become an expert at the transcription of printed music into Braille for the benefit of the blind. 1 week later, his application for release on license had been refused, but it was recommended that he be moved to an open prison. And in June of that same year, Michael Gove, then Justice Secretary, agreed with the board's recommendation, and at some point prior to the 8th of January 2017, he was moved to an undisclosed open prison. On the 3rd of May 2018, once again, he was refused release on license, but the parole board said that Colin would be eligible for a further review within 2 years. Now, after these further reviews, it would be reported that on the 13th of July 2021, Colin would go on to be released from jail, and as of today, the 1st of September 2021, the child rapist and murderer was released and is currently out there a free man. But give the video a like for more crime related content like this, and make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't. It's been me, Huncho, and I'll see you in the next one.